Imagine the life of a medieval nun, a world of silent prayer behind cold, cloistered walls, a life of forced piety, or perhaps a peaceful escape from a violent world, a place where women were buried alive for breaking their vows. But what if both of these images are a fiction? What if the reality was far more complex, more demanding, and in many ways more powerful? For thousands of women from all walks of life, the convent wasn't just a place of prayer. It was a university, a hospital, a corporate headquarters, and a sovereign state, all rolled into one. So what did a nun in a medieval monastery actually do from the moment the bell tolled in the dead of night to the moment she finally rested her head? To step into a medieval convent is to step into a world that spans a millennium, from the fall of Rome to the dawn of the Renaissance. But this was not a monolithic experience. The daily life of a nun in a wealthy urban abbey in 12th century Paris, surrounded by scholars and royalty, was worlds apart from that of a sister in a small, austere Cistercian priory in the remote English countryside, where survival was a constant struggle. The rhythm of this life was dictated by a divine schedule, most commonly the rule of Saint Benedict. Its foundational principle was ora et labora, pray and work. This was not a gentle suggestion, it was a rigid, God-given framework that left little to chance. At the helm of this micro-society was the abbess. She was often one of the most powerful women of her age. A figure like Abbess Hildegard von Bingen in 12th century Germany didn't just lead prayers, she ruled vast estates, advised popes and emperors, composed groundbreaking music, wrote scientific and theological texts, and managed a community with the acumen of a modern CEO. She could be summoned to royal courts, settle legal disputes, and her authority within her own domain was nearly absolute. Our journey into their world is possible because they were meticulous chroniclers of their own existence. Unlike the illiterate peasantry, these women lived lives rich with text and texture, leaving behind a treasure trove of evidence for us to decipher. The walls of the convent may have been designed to separate the nuns from the world, but they were not silent. First, we have their words and art. Nuns were among the most literate women of their time. They didn't just copy sacred texts, they composed them. They wrote passionate theological letters, detailed spiritual visions, and practical manuals on medicine. The artwork they produced in their scriptoria was not mere decoration, it was a form of visual theology, a deeply intellectual and creative pursuit. Second, we have their business records. Convents were major economic players. Their account rolls, written in a precise, no-nonsense hand, detail a sprawling enterprise. Rents from tenant farmers, profits from selling wool and embroidery, expenses for repairing mills, and purchases of wax for candles and fish for Friday meals. These dry documents reveal the convent as a bustling corporate entity. Finally, we have their physical remains. Archaeology tells a story that texts sometimes omit. Analysis of skeletal remains from convent cemeteries shows that nuns were often taller and healthier than the general population, with fewer signs of malnutrition or violent injury. They enjoyed a better, more varied diet. Personal items found in excavations, writing implements, jewelry, game pieces, musical instruments, paint a picture of a cultured and at times surprisingly worldly life behind the walls. Let us now walk a single day in the worn leather shoes of a choir nun in a large Benedictine abbey. Her life is a symphony conducted by the canonical hours, the 8 sacred periods of prayer that fracture the day and night. Her day begins in profound darkness.
Around 2 a.m., a bell shatters the silence of the dormitory. She rises from a straw-filled mattress, shivering in the cold air, and joins a silent procession of shadows moving towards the church. For the next hour or more, by the flickering light of a few candles, she stands with her sisters, chanting psalms, singing hymns, and listening to readings. This is Matins, the night office. It is a brutal, disorienting start to the day, a deliberate act of sacrifice that prioritizes God's time over human comfort. This is where discipline is forged. After a scant few hours of fitful rest, the bell rings again before dawn. She returns to the church for lauds, the service of praise to greet the rising sun, followed immediately by prime. Only after these spiritual duties are complete does the community break its fast. The meal is simple and silent, perhaps coarse bread, a piece of cheese, and a cup of weak beer, the standard, safer-than-water drink of the era.
With practical needs met, the community gathers for one of the most psychologically intense parts of the day, the chapter meeting. In a dedicated chamber, the abbess presides. The first part is administrative. She listens to reports from the cellarer on grain stores, from the grange manager on the sheep flock, from the novice mistress on a new postulant. This is the boardroom of a large organization. Then, the mood shifts. This is the time for discipline. A nun might step forward and accuse herself of a fault, breaking the rule of silence, showing pride in her work, or the grave sin of owning a personal possession. Or a sister might be accused by another. The penalties could range from extra prayers to a diet of bread and water, or, in extreme cases, corporal punishment. This public scrutiny was a powerful tool for maintaining order and humility, a constant reminder that the community's spiritual health depended on the conduct of each individual. The morning is now dedicated to Labora work, and this is where the simplistic image of the nun completely shatters. For a nun with intellectual gifts, her destination is the scriptorium. Here, the morning light is a precious commodity. Her work is slow, meticulous, and physically demanding. She prepares the parchment, mixes inks from soot, minerals, and plants, and for the glorious illuminations, grinds precious pigments, lapis lazuli for a blue more expensive than gold, malachite for green, vermilion for red. A single decorated capital letter, intertwined with vines and mythical creatures, could take an entire day. This was not mindless duplication, it was a form of meditation and creation. Nuns like the 12th century Buddha even inserted self-portraits into their manuscripts, a tiny but defiant assertion of their identity and authorship, leaving a message for history. Buddha, a sinful woman, wrote and painted this book.
Not all work was intellectual. Many nuns moved to other specialized spaces. In the infirmary, the nun apothecary tends to the sick. She cultivates a physic garden full of rosemary for memory, sage for cleansing, lavender for calm, and 100 other plants whose properties she knows intimately. She diagnoses ailments, prepares remedies, and even performs minor surgeries. This was a critical form of charity that also tied the convent to the local community, ensuring goodwill and support. In the workrooms, other sisters are engaged in textile production. For convents like those in medieval England, this was a primary source of wealth.
They produced opus Anglicanum, English work, exquisite embroideries using silk and gold thread on rich velvets, used for ecclesiastical vestments and royal garments that were prized across Europe. This was art, but it was also serious business. And for the lay sisters, women from poorer backgrounds who performed manual labor and took simpler vows, the work was even more physically demanding: baking, brewing, cooking, cleaning, and working in the fields.
The convent's hierarchy was reflected in its labor.
The main meal, taken in the refectory, is another exercise in silence and piety. As the nuns eat, one of the sisters reads aloud from a spiritual text, a saint's life perhaps, or a passage from the Bible. The diet, dictated by the church calendar, forbids meat, but is often far from meager. Archaeological evidence from sites like Carrow Priory in England reveals a diet rich in fish, eggs, dairy, vegetables, and grains. Some convents even had their own fish ponds and rabbit warrens, ensuring a steady supply of fresh protein.
The afternoon continues the rhythm of work. For some, this might be teaching. Many convents ran schools for the daughters of the local nobility. Here, young girls learn not just prayer, but reading, writing, music, and embroidery, the essential skills for running a noble household, or indeed for becoming an abbess themselves one day. The convent was a crucible for female education in a world that offered few other opportunities.
As the day begins to wane, the community gathers once more in the church for Vespers. This is often the most beautiful and melodic of the services, a reflective offering at the end of the working day. The plain chant, perhaps even a composition by their own abbess, echoes off the stone, a moment of collective beauty and release. After a light supper, the final canonical hour, Compline, is sung. This service, asking for God's protection through the night, officially ends the communal day. Afterwards, the great silence begins. No words are to be spoken until after the chapter meeting the next morning. The nuns retire to the dormitory, but this time might be used for private prayer, study, or mending clothes. It is the only true solitude they will find.
But the relentless schedule of prayer and work was only the visible surface. Beneath it lay a world of immense, invisible pressures. The politics of the cloister. Convents were not immune to the world's conflicts. They were often pawns in political games. An abbess might have to fiercely resist the encroachment of a local bishop seeking to control her house's wealth, or navigate the demands of a noble family who had donated land and now expected influence. Intellectual and personal rivalries flared within the community itself. The cloister was a hothouse environment where passions for God, for learning, for power ran high. For many nuns, especially from the aristocracy, their vocation was not a choice, but a strategy. With a family's land and title destined for the eldest son, placing a daughter in a well-connected convent was a way to avoid fragmenting the estate while gaining the spiritual and political patronage of a powerful institution.
These women never fully left their families behind. They remained a link, receiving visitors and managing their family's interests from within the walls, a constant reminder of the life they might have had. Despite the patriarchal structure of the church, the convent was a rare space where women could exercise genuine institutional authority. And abbess had power over land, people, and finances that few other women could ever dream of. It was a platform from which a figure like Hildegard could challenge male authority, publicly correcting an emperor and corresponding with popes as an equal, using her divine visions as her source of unassailable power.
So what did a medieval nun actually do all day?
She was a scholar, an artist, a CEO, a farmer, a teacher, a healer, and a politician, all while carrying the immense spiritual burden of being a bride of Christ.
Her divine power was not manifested in miracles, but in the meticulous balancing of ledgers, the healing power of herbs, the disciplined beauty of chant, and the fierce protection of her community's independence. The next time you imagine a medieval nun, remember not just the silent prayer, but the administrator who managed an economic empire. Not just the cloistered figure, but the intellectual who composed music that still moves us today. Not just the bride of Christ, but the woman who, within the confines of her world, carved out a domain of female power, learning, and resilience that has few parallels in history. Her day was a relentless symphony of duty, a complex composition of heaven and earth, played out hour by hour, prayer by prayer, within the stone walls of her chosen world.